For the project, for CompMusic, what I see mainly the idea is that we have a lot of opportunities by looking at these music traditions that we have chosen. And it's very important. We don't have infinite manpower. We don't have infinite time. So it's very important to focus on the things that might be most relevant and that might have the most impact in the research field, in the community, and hopefully also in the society and in the cultural context that we are working on. So a lot of the things this last year has been, in fact, trying to think about that. Trying to think about what are the relevant problems, what are the relevant opportunities that we might be able to work on. So let me, in order to talk about that, let me just give you the context and some ideas and some examples. So it will be just not a very formal and structured kind of talk, but give you some ideas about all that. The first I want to talk about is the current topics in the field of MIR. The field of MIR could be the framework, is the easiest way to frame our research. MIR, music information retrieval, has become in the last 15 years a very active field of research all around the world. In China, I was there for a month, and I basically met with around 20 research groups in China that had never worked in music, and they're all now working in music information research. There was no research practically in music technology in China, and now this field has developed there. And that's the situation in many places around the world. So the field of MIR has really gone into many places, many academic disciplines. So even though I have my feelings about whether that's the appropriate framework, but I think it's the most practical one to talk about. So let me just briefly talk about that, then give you some examples of music, of these cultures that we are working on, and give you some sort of a feeling for what is my approach when we listen and we see that music. And then I will talk about specifically this idea of what are the challenges that this approach of cultural specificity we can have. And then our project and most of the engineering work that we do is data-driven. Basically, we analyze data. We analyze digital data, machine-readable data that we can process. So it's very important to have data available. And so unless we have data, we cannot do research. So it's very important to identify what data is available and how we can process it. And finally, I want to briefly talk about the current issues, problems that CompMusic is working on, and that basically reflects a lot of the papers that will be presented in the between today and tomorrow. So in MIR, this, if you look, so the next conference of the music information community is in Porto in October, and if you look through the papers that are being presented in that conference, they basically all would fit into these categories. Well, maybe you are not so familiar with some of them, but basically, well, audio identification means to really identify. This is the topic that has been more commercially successful. The idea of you want to know what song is being broadcast on a radio or a TV or on a bar, so that you can give that playlist to the Author Society and they can collect money with. That has been I guess the first successful example of technology from our community that is commercially viable. But there is many other problems that have more or less a clear application, like beat detection, chord recognition, genre identification, cover song detection, query by humming, collaborative filtering, instrument recognition, music similarity, mood classification, audio summarization, music transcription, and some other ones. Basically, most of these, they come from the idea that the information technologies have the opportunity, have the capability to recommend music to someone, music that you have never heard. So the idea comes from this, there is all these CDs available, all these records that the music industry has produced over the years that they want to sell you, and you're able, and they want to allow you to find them. So nowadays, with these large databases and iTunes and Amazon, the challenge is how a commercial company can can suggest you a CD that you would want to buy. And a lot of the research is driven for that. And that's the concept of music recommendation. And of course, that means that is pushed by the commercial music, and is pushed by the idea of selling audio tracks to a possible consumer. And I don't know if you could understand from my words, but I don't like that too much. I mean, I think it's a very good technology, is very needed by the commercial world, but I would like to believe that there's many other things that we can do, and that music deserves more than to be considered an object to be bought and to be distributed. And there is many other services and many other applications that we can think of that could benefit the musicians, that could benefit the society at large, and that could be useful for enjoying and having access to music. And that's basically what I would like to emphasize in our project, not so much this idea of recommendation, but maybe a term that is more general and more appropriate is the idea of discovery of music. And I will talk a little bit about that, and some of the ideas that we will go through are along those lines. So basically, all these systems in MIR in general, and what we do too in CompMusic, they start with the data that is available on, let's say, basically on internet. On internet, you find audio recordings, you find a whole bunch of text, you find a whole bunch of images related to music. Okay, but that's kind of very low-level type of data. It's data that is huge, is unstructured, and the goal of all these applications that I mentioned and some others is how to make sense of that data, how to structure that data into information, not just data. So I think it's important the distinction between data and information. So we want to generate information that is meaningful for a recommendation system, but also for many other things. We would like to extract things like the melody, we identify the instruments, identify the performer. Of course, a lot of this information is already available as part of the data, but maybe it's not so well structured. So of course, there is a lot of structured data already available, but we want to complete that, and in many cases, even just from scratch, generate all that structured data. So that's the general goal of MIR, to generate semantically meaningful information out of this low-level, unstructured data that we now have access to and that is available all over the internet and all over the digital systems. So let me just now put some musical examples, and what I would like you to, while you listen, and of course most of this music some of you will know very well, but the idea is not to listen and enjoy, but what basically is to try to think about. Yes. So to think about, from a technological point of view, if you would like to access, to navigate through that music, to put it into iTunes, to put it into a machine that would allow us to handle that and manage that information, what it would require. And basically, for me, the challenge is that what we have been working on, many of these typical concepts that we're working on, when we think about a particular type of music, a lot of things either or they don't quite work or they have to be rethought. So let's just play some music and see. Well, maybe most of you know this. And for me, the idea is not so much, oh, hold it. Oh. It's not so much to recognize what it is. It's basically, this is the data that is on internet. You can find this recording. So what information you would like around that data that would allow for you to appreciate it more, for someone that doesn't know that much about this music, appreciate it more, and that is basically from the audio is not there. So typically in MIR, the first type of issues that we would be working on would be, let's find the beat to this music. Let's find the chords. Let's find the tonality of this speech. And I guess, as you can imagine, this does not apply here. Something else should be thought about. So I guess for whoever doesn't recognize, I mean, this is a Drupad Hindustani music, and it's one of well-known gharanas of Drupad music. Uday Bayawalkar, I guess you pronounce it. I don't know. And I heard him in Chennai at the festival in last December, and it was really good. Or for example, in Carnatic music, a madranga player, again from the festival. To try to identify the beat from this audio recording with the techniques that we have been developing for years is a challenge. It's definitely not an obvious thing to do. In Turkish music, this is kemençe player. Let's just play. So for us, it's out of tune, and it's definitely not out of tune. So the issue is how to analyze this in its proper intonation context. I was, as I mentioned, I was in China for a month, and I discovered some of the most amazing music. In fact, I fall in love with this instrument. This is the guqin. It's an instrument that is it's thousands of years old. Confucius, 2,500 years old ago, used to play this instrument. He has a repertoire and written scores going back more than 1,000 years. Most of the gestures that they produce are not heard, and they are very important. The sound does not capture a lot of the things of what's going on. So the typical conception that music is audio, here it breaks miserably. Without seeing the gesture, the articulations that the musician is doing, you're missing out a lot of the important nuances and expressive characteristics of this music. And it's partly related with the fact that Chinese is a tonal language, and in fact what he's doing is basically playing a poem, following the articulations, the tonal structure of the language. So in fact he's reciting, and that gives you a whole bunch of very interesting things to work on, which is very obvious in the opera. I went to a number of Beijing operas, and this is a recording I did. If you have never heard Beijing opera, the first time you hear, you get some problems. So this is a male singer dressed in a female costume. Most of the singers sing falsetto. In China, there is only around 250 types of opera. Each one different, and they basically relate to the different languages, and every language has its own music, and you can think about it. I mean, for me, the first, without knowing anything about musicology and given that every language has its own tonal structure, in a natural way, the music of that particular language is very different from each other. But I don't know, I'm sure some people know more than I do. But anyway, okay, so this is clearly, for me, this is fascinating opportunities to work on some things about the music that might be even present in many musics in the world, but by listening, by studying those musics, they become apparent that we would not see those aspects in other types of music. So let me just quickly go through the challenges that I believe are clearly and this type of music brings. And The first one, of course, is to find these particular musical repertoires, these particular musical cultures that can give us this amazing opportunity to study new things. Of course, there are zillions around the world that could have these possibilities. And for me, the idea of a musical culture, it's very clearly defined from a computational point of view as the combination of the musical repertoire plus the community that supports that. You cannot understand a musical repertoire without understanding the cultural context and the community that supports that. So it's very, very important to work on the two aspects in a unified way. Of course, for the project, we already kind of chose these 5 big areas, but even within that, we have to narrow down. So in China, it's impossible to work with the whole traditions that are there. Even in Turkey, it's impossible, so we have to narrow down. In India, clearly, it's also not possible. So we have to narrow down to something that, for a computational point of view, makes sense and can be worked on. And then the next challenge is to find the data. In these repertoires in particular, it's not that bad in the sense that there's a lot of CDs available, there's a lot of books. Of course, in China, most are in Chinese, but anyway, but they're available, and many people know how to use them. So the issue is that a lot of these cultures, they have not been as active on the internet world as, let's say, Western pop music. So therefore, to put all this data available in a machine-readable format for these systems to work on requires some work. So a lot of this initial work that we have been doing in the project has been to gather that data and put it into repositories, open repositories for researchers to be able to access and analyze them. Another aspect is to identify these aspects, these gems that each culture has that no one else has. And I think that's a very interesting thing. Of course, every music has a number of things that are very common to every other type of music. And there are many things that are very much, we could talk in a unified way. But I think what is very interesting is to focus on the differences, to focus on these aspects that make that music emphasize an aspect of the music that other type of music does not emphasize. So we have a better opportunity to work on that aspect. So for example, Chinese music, the timing and the meters they use are very simple. They normally use duple meters and quadruple meters and 4/4 typically. So basically it means, well, maybe it's not so interesting to work on meter type issues on Chinese music. But in turn, it makes a lot of sense to work in Chinese music in relation between the lyrics or the language and the music. And this would apply to any other type of music. And then, of course, the challenge from an engineering point of view is to try to find what methodologies can be developed that are useful for that. And as engineers, of course, and from an academic point of view, the idea is to develop new methodologies. It's not just the fact of just taking existing repertoire, existing problem, and apply what has been applied to Western music and just directly apply it. I mean, that's fine, but that's not an engineering research problem. We have to find methodologies that, by looking at that repertoire, we can develop that have not been worked on before, or that they have not been seen from that perspective. So it's very important to develop these methodologies. I started mentioning about this idea of music recommendation. Music recommendation is the application that the Western commercial systems basically won. I mean, all the musical industry, the survival of the music industry as we know it, basically the current idea is that, okay, let's try to exploit all our repertoire So maybe we are not going to make so much money by selling every CD, but if we are able to sell everything we have digitally, we're going to be able to make some money out of that. So we're going to charge less, but we're going to be able to sell many more things. But the idea is, okay, on every particular musical culture, is that the typical application, or is that the only application that we can think of that is useful to the society? And I think clearly there's other things that when we look at a particular context, we might see that is useful, relevant, and very appropriate for that culture. And finally, of course, we want to do comparative studies. Even though for me, is not the main and should not be the starting point, but we definitely will do it. But for me, clearly, if you want to compare apples and oranges, you first have to understand the apples and then and the oranges in order to be able to compare them. So that's what we want. If we want to compare the Carnatic music with Turkish music, we first have to have models and we have to have an understanding of those traditions. And of course, then in a natural way, we will be comparing them. Okay, so this is the challenges. And then the data available, as I mentioned, we have been collecting a lot of things and identifying data sources that exist and that we are starting to work from. And there is a lot of text data and audio data. And well, let me just quickly go. In terms of descriptive text, there is a lot. I mean, and of course, we want descriptive text about the music that is from experts, that is from people that know what they are talking about. Of course, we also want the other one, but this is basically we want to use this text as a way to characterize the music. It's the better we can gather the text, the higher the quality, the better. Of course, we have all the academic articles, encyclopedias, and research journals. And nowadays, there is a lot of online tools to gather, organize that. We use Mendeley as a way to gather all the expert information and academic information for that. Nowadays, a source that is becoming more and more on this expert side is tools like Wikipedia, more and more, and it has been clearly shown that the quality is as comparable as many of what traditionally we called encyclopedias, traditional encyclopedias. But it has a problem, and for me that's one that I have been emphasizing a lot in this project, and that nowadays the people that are mainly putting this information online come from a particular cultural context. This is the entry for Raga. I have no idea who put this entry, but my initial guess will be that this would have been put by an Indian living in the US, a first or second generation Indian person living in the US, which is perfect. Thanks to them, we have all this information online. But what is the problem with that? That presumably, when you read this, it always refers to Western concepts. Whenever, as soon as you, for anyone, you live in a Western country and you sort of get immersed into the academia of that, you constantly are comparing things through and comparing things with the Western perspective. So when you define Raga, typically, I don't know, I haven't even read this one, but typically you would say it's like a scale or it's like something, and I think that's we should try to avoid. I mean, for me, the idea is let's try to define every concept through the context that it makes sense and that was developed under. And what I always say, and this is what the reference that most Indian students, whenever I go through India and I ask in a lecture hall with Indian students where they get their information from to do cut and paste for their final projects, it's Wikipedia. So basically, Indian students are using this as the expert information for Indian information. And that might have some problems. So I think it's important to address those issues. And there's even more, but anyway, let's just. About audio data, of course, the biggest problem about audio data is the copyright issue and how to be able to gather large repositories for research and that is open to the research community or at least to the project. So we have been buying a lot of CDs. In India, it's okay because the CDs are cheap. In Turkey, it's a little bit more expensive, so it's harder to gather CDs. But anyway, we have been gathering a lot of CDs. We also have done some recordings, small recordings of things, and that we use this site that we developed, Free Sound, as a way to, as a repository of sounds that can be put under Creative Commons. So anyway, so that's one of the challenges in the project is gathering data. A lot of the work we do requires large amounts of audio data. So that means that we need hundreds and hundreds of CDs even to address some of the problems that we want to work on. Together with the audio data, we need the editorial data of the CDs. And we are using these music brains, which is an open platform that people, the community, adds the information of the CDs and the contextual information of the CDs. It has millions of CDs. It has all the Western music. We bought maybe, I don't know, of the 500 CDs we bought from Indian music, I don't have the numbers, but maybe only 2 were in here. So it means that the Indian CDs and either the music lovers and people that are around that culture have not been active in adding this information online. So, and this is used by Google, is used by many other things. So unless this information is online, it means that Amazon, it means that many of these initiatives will not find those CDs. So, so all the record companies should, when they release a CD, put that information in some place, hopefully Music Brains. So anyway, so we have been putting a lot of effort, well, the students have been putting a lot of effort into adding this metadata into Music Brains, and I think that's a good resource for everyone, because this is data that then not only people but also these engines and use it and make reference to. So it's very important that it's there and that is good, that is well put, and there's a lot of issues of how to put that data in a proper way. A lot of the work we do is based on analyzing the audio. So we analyze all these low-level features of the audio, and then on top of which then we can do things. So we have a repository, and we will be talking about that of all these analysis data that again will be available. Music notation, especially in Turkish music, is very important. So it's very important that we gather notation of music and that we can analyze it and that we can make it available to the people. So the Turkish team has been doing a good effort in that, and they have a very good collection of music notation that we'll be releasing openly, and that will be a great tool for the community. The lyrics, we are not working so much in lyrics. Hopefully, maybe in Chinese music we will, but there is that's normally not a big problem. There is a lot of the lyrics in all the songs in Indian music, Turkish music. Well, this is this encyclopedia that has been developed here, and they have a lot of the lyrics too. So, so that's a very good source of data for studying the lyrics. And also it's very good, even though of course this is not expert information, but it's very important to try. Music is something that has to be of use to the society. So what the society feels, talks, discusses is very interesting and important for many problems. To try to understand what is their opinion, what is the interest, who are the artists that are most talked about and why, and what are the people think. And nowadays we have tools to analyze all this data automatically. So there will be one paper on analyzing rasicas.org. There's not that many sites that are specialized and that have some level on these different types of music, but that's a very good. So anyway, so let me just then go to given that we have a lot of data already, and we have access to that, and we know more or less what we want to do, what are the problems that we have started working on and that we believe make sense for developing technologies. So the first one is intonation. Clearly, when in the Western perspective, we have always been working on equal tempered scales and the tuning of the piano, and therefore the concept of intonation is not such an issue there, because basically you are out of tune if you sing out of the equal tempered scale, and that's it. Clearly, in Turkish music, Indian music, we have to be more sophisticated about that. We have to think about what does it mean to the concept of the pitches that a musician uses in a performance, and how we can analyze, how we can characterize this pitch space that a musician uses in a performance. So even we have to rethink the concept of intonation. In the West, basically, there is no difference between intonation and tuning, and clearly in Indian music, that's not the case. So we have been working, and there is a number of papers talking about the issue of intonation. The next one is about melody. So if you look at any description about melody from, typically it has this very Western concept of sequence of discrete events, discrete notes in time. And there has been quite a bit of work on that. As soon as you look into some of these repertoires that we're looking at, melody brings some new challenges. Segmentation into events clearly is not easy to do, and maybe not appropriate. So how to describe melodies, how to be able to analyze melodies and structure and see the information and the musical meaning that the pitch information has. So this you will see also there is quite a number of papers dealing with that. Rhythm is the other complementary aspect. We still have not worked so much in rhythm, but hopefully that will change. I think there is only 2 papers in rhythm, but there is a lot of very interesting things. It's much more difficult for me, clearly, that this shows a clear example of how much more difficult is rhythm analysis in Turkish or Indian music than in Western pop music, and that we really need to develop completely new ways of thinking about it and analyzing it. So this is going to be a big challenge of how to think about rhythm in these musical repertoires. Related with what I said, another aspect is characterizing the community, the people that support that music and that talk about that and that support in general all the music. So anyway, so there will be a couple of papers on these aspects. And finally, we don't want to do basic research for the sake of it. We want to do things that can allow us to interact with the music and to make it something that is useful. So the concept of browsing and discovering for us is a very important concept. So the idea is that we want to develop ways to navigate through these collections, through this data, in a musically meaningful way. So we still have not worked so much into that, but basically a prototype that we're putting together and that will be available hopefully as soon as we have something that works, but maybe it's going to be after the summer, that attempts to start showing some of these ideas. And there will be a paper presenting specifically this tool, which for us is a way to, is a tool. Of course, it doesn't aim to be a commercial product of any kind, but is a way also to think about what is relevant, the research that we should be working on, and to show our research results. Maybe not all, but hopefully quite a bit of the research results will be able to be demonstrated through a tool that allows us to navigate through a given collection and see different aspects of that music. And I guess that's all I wanted to say. So anyway, thank you.